Productive Pastor 111, the dumping ground. Welcome back, friends. It's Chad Brooks. Another episode of Productive Pastor, the place online to talk about healthy ministry through strategic productivity. As I've queued up the next 4 episodes, kind of put those in the development angle. What I want to do over July is go back to a bare bones. Let's go to a 101. But I want to talk about these basic productivity tasks in a super granular way, along the lines of the simple day-to-day, the simple strategies, the simple things you can do to have healthy ministry through strategic productivity. These are all like single ideas. And what's so funny is a lot of these single ideas I talk about on a lot of different episodes. And some of them, like the episode today on the dumping ground, I probably have done an episode on it before in the past, but that was a year ago. And this tactic has just gone even deeper and deeper into my life. It's with all of these things as I talk about with what some of these basic productivity practices, these 101s, these core ideas, these things that can change so much stuff. They're all practices. And, I'm going to talk about dumping grounds. I'm going to do an episode on the daily logs, do an episode about how to get your calendar controlled. And then we do an episode about communication tactics and productivity and communication. Now, these are all sorts of things that I believe we might not necessarily have on the front of our brains as we think about Productivity 101 or these core tasks. But I think all these things can be absolute game changers. So we're going to get started. The dumping ground. And what is it? What is it? Why do you do it? There's a rub here of what makes it so powerful. Talk about when, talk about how, kind of hit those basic things. But what is a dumping ground? A dumping ground is pretty simple. It really is very simple. What might be so strategic and so powerful about it is how you choose to use it. But what it is, at its most basic, is just a piece of paper or a document that you use to drop things into. In my free email course, the 515, which is about taking a week to get yourself out of ministry chaos, the dumping ground is one of the first things we talk about. And it's a simple practice. And I think it's so simple, sometimes we might override how important it can be in it. There's no system, there's no strategy to a dumping ground. It's about you just saying, I've got a piece of paper, I've got an open document, and whatever you choose to use, and I'm going to set a timer, and I'm just going to drop down all of the things that are living in my head, all of the tasks, all of the projects, all of the things. I think the most important thing, if there's any strategy to this, it's this strategy that your only job at this moment right now is to not try to filter anything. You just need to dump all of the things that you feel like you are carrying in your brain onto this piece of paper or onto this document for the sake of future productivity, future planning, future strategy, any sort of things for the sake of the future. So why do you do this? The biggest reason, this is kind of there's a psychological dynamic here. It's just the power of clearing your brain. Like, that's all you're doing. You're clearing your brain in this moment. You're writing these things down in a place that you can save, in a place you can come back to just get them out of your brain to create more space. I'm about to completely butcher this word, absolutely and totally, but there's a great article on HBR. I'll have it linked in the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/111. That's called Why Your Brain Dwells on Unfinished Tasks. And there's a fancy German word for it, the Ziggernock, I think. Let's call it that way. But the Ziggernock effect, it talks about it in this article. But pretty much what it is, they psychologically realize that unfinished tasks actually create a cognitive tension in your brain that makes you come back to them. And the analogy in the article, it talked about how waiters or waitresses, ask, what do you want? Don't write it down, and it comes to you, hopefully, in exactly what you ordered. That there's a thing that happens in our brain when we put something inside of it that we know we need to remember. It holds on to it. And once the task is done, it's out of the way. The same article talked about how you ask a waiter or waitress at the end of their shift, hey, what did so-and-so order? They probably can't remember it, but they remembered it enough to get it into the kitchen system. Now, this is true. This is an amazing thing that our brain does, but if we never write anything down, if we don't have any sort of catching system or that kind of stuff, we're not going to go deep into the realms of working and keeping systems. I've had episodes about that before. I've talked about that in multiple courses that I've had, both Becoming Productive and the Trello course and other stuff I've taught. We're not going to go into that. We're not there yet. This is simply about you unburdening your brain with the things that you are carrying around. The Ziegler-Knock effect can be handy for remembering, but it can be very, very bad for productivity. We want to try to avoid that in this scenario, and that's what the brain dump does. The brain dump gets all of those tasks that might be sitting inside of your brain, taking up energy and space, creating cognitive tension, all of those sorts of things, and it gets them to a place where you can then thereby begin clearing your mind. And here's the rub. Ministry is complicated. If you're in ministry and you're listening to this, you don't have to argue with me on that. Ministry can be very complicated. You think about when I was serving a local church full time, the amount of stuff people would try to tell me on Sunday morning. Have you ever had that before? Worship hasn't started. Somebody grabs you and starts trying to tell you important things about an upcoming meeting or a project or a problem in the youth ministry, all these sorts of stuff. And you want to just shake them politely and say, I'm not going to remember this. My brain is focused on something else right now. Ministry can be complicated. We kind of have like 3 different buckets that the average pastor is carrying around. You've got the preparation bucket for sermons, for Bible studies, for teaching, for all those sorts of things. You have the care bucket, the people management bucket. You've got hospital visits, you've got pastoral care, you've got discipleship, you've got spiritual formation, you've got leadership development. You have all of those sorts of things that you're carrying around with you. Then you also have the organizational leadership of your church, the actual operations. How are things running? How are things being organized? How are you, in charge of the thing that you're tasked to be in charge with? I mean, not a Methodist pastor, and part of our ordination is that we're ordained to a ministry of word sacrament, but also of order, of keeping things orderly and under control. All of those things can be very complicated. How much are you actually carrying around in your brain right now that you can unload with just the dumping ground strategy? And that's the thing, is this isn't a one-time thing. It's almost an approach, as with all these core practices are. They're an approach to the ways that you move through the idea of ministry. So that leads us to our next idea of when do I need to do a dump? Well, it's whenever you need to clear your mind. You might be in a particular season where things are absolutely chaotic and you're very, very overwhelmed. That's what the 515 course, and like I said, you can get it for free, links in the show notes. Sign up for that. It's delivered via email, 5 mornings, 15-minute exercises a day. And it's all about taking control of chaos. You might be in a season of chaos and you're overwhelmed, and doing a dumping ground session is the first step towards getting you out of that chaos. It might just be at the beginning of the week or the month. I mean, I've kind of started doing this every couple of weeks or so, just throwing down, okay, these are everything I'm carrying in my mind. These are the tasks that are sitting inside of Trello. These are the things that are just kind of floating around in my notebook that I might not have paid attention to. Let me collate them all together and get them on the same piece of paper. And that's there. At the beginning of a month, as you're kicking off the beginning of a month, I talked about this a lot in the last Memorial Day course we did, the Productive Pastor Planner Template Pack. There's several different worksheets that were part of that product that were there. They're just dumping ground strategies for specific groups of time. You might, at the beginning of the month, hey, these are all the things I know that are going to happen. If these things I want to focus, I need to focus on, or I have to focus on, whatever it is, whatever this beginning of the week of time. Dumping ground's on a to-do list. That comes later. It's a brain dump. That's what you're doing. You're doing a massive, huge brain dump for the sake of clearing yourself out. And you're trusting that the stuff is safe because you wrote it down. So how do you do this? Okay. Now, unless it's an absolute emergency and you're freaking out at the Waffle House, don't make it on a napkin. Now, I might have made napkin or paper plate or back of receipt dumping ground sessions before. Absolutely happens because it's an emergency situation, or I might have just been sitting at a place and my brain really was working well and I wanted to take advantage of it. But try not to live inside of emergency mode. It's just like any time, any skill, any competence you develop. the more you do it, the easier it gets to do it the next time. And so I would suggest if you're a person who carries a lot in your brain, or if things seem to be overly busy, just get used to doing a weekly brain dump. You do it in a place you can save it, either on a piece of paper in a notebook, on a digital file in some sort of software. You might, and I've done this before, I went through a cycle of just folding up a sheet of 8.5 by 11 paper, keeping it in my pocket, and just kind of, running down on that sort of a thing to cross off or whatever like that. But you want to do this in a place you can save it. What I would suggest is set a timer, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or longer, and just write it all down. Just get it all out on the piece of paper. Like I said earlier, this is not a time for sorting or for filtering or anything like that. Just get as much as you can down on the paper. And if you're in a particular moment where it's the time to think about this, then the time comes to start sorting it. You might want to do some color codes for it. I've done that before in the past with the different aspects of ministry of what that looks like. Color code them. I might, do some lines to each other's, the ones that might be related, or circles and boxes, that sort of a thing. I've done all of that before. But, you then you get them filtered once on your piece of paper. And then the next thing you do is you want to maybe rank the importance. You might realize that some of these things that are on there are immediately important to your situation and scenario. And you want to put a star around that or put a number 1 next to it, that sort of stuff. You also might want to think about ranking the amount of time it might take to do that. What I found out, and this kind of goes into the next step, is sometimes you realize you're really stressed out about something big, and you've been carrying the big thing around with you without starting any of it because you've not, you're so overwhelmed with how much time it's going to take. When you're in one of those scenarios, and we go into the next place, then you add your details, your steps, your people, those sorts of things. I found that for anyone who gets significantly stressed out with this sort of thing, the first big major step is just simply to start making a plan. Once you've got your big dumping ground, you've got it sorted, you've got it ranked with importance and time, and then you can go in and then add those bullet points, add the steps, think through, okay, this needs to happen first, and this happens, and this happens. A lot of times what I realize is my dumping ground, if I have these things that are semi-related, I'm like 50% there on the dumping ground, and really it's just a matter of arranging things and then filling in the gaps. But I have to tell you, this idea of the dumping ground has been more and more important lately as ministry is shaping and shifting for me, as I'm having to deal with more details. I'm going to talk about that in the next episode on why I love keeping a day log now. That's been a new practice of mine. But the dumping ground is something that sometimes I'll go through seasons where I'll do one every morning when I sit down, or I'll do it at the end of the day based off of, what came across or I'll come out of a big meeting. If I have an important, a couple hour long meeting, I'll make sure I take 5-10 minutes while everybody's just kind of sitting around, or maybe hopefully after everybody's left the room, just write down everything I can think about, write down all the stuff. If you're taking good meeting notes, you might not do it so much, but one of these like silver bullet strategies that we find for personal productivity ministry, I think, is the dumping ground. So I'd love to hear from you about what you think about that. You can cruise over to the Productive Pastor community. Over 1,000 pastors are there hanging out, talking about productivity, sharing stuff with each other. We'll have a thread on this episode. Come hang out in the thread. Come meet some friends. Come ask questions or offer suggestions or that sort of a thing. We'd love to have you over there on Productive Pastor Community. But as always, it's a treasure to steward this. Hope this helps. I'll see you back in the next episode on keeping a daily log, because it's awesome. See you then.